Hello, my name is Pascal Carl Price, and this is my presentation for the second master's class from GCAS in philosophy. It was taught by the amazing Kristen Davis. And so I did a paper talking about, you want to call it Descartes and unintentional consequences. You know, the old proverb says the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that can never be more true than with what happened with Rene Descartes. But in order to set the stage, we need to go back a little bit, and it's a good warning for us because his I think, therefore I am was a hinge that pivoted from, we're going to say, Augustine's worldview, which is a theocentric worldview, to the modern worldview. And how does this begin? It begins with Augustine. Augustine, about 400 in the Common Era, AD, you know, he was the bishop of Hippo, and he had many friends. And later in his life, he wrote basically his confessions. And he talks about when he was a young kid, he stole pears. The problem with the stealing the pears was it was basically a sin to him. He offended a God, the most loving God. And what he did is he reordered his loves instead of, as opposed to loving God the most, he loved the pears more than obeying God. It's basically change the order of his loves. He loved the creature more than the creator, or the thing that the creator created, which was the pears. And it basically, he was basically repentant, and he thought about this, and he says basically even every petty theft basically falls because you mess up your order of your loves. Do you love God more, or do you love the things more? Okay, but his worldview was basically around for a long time, and basically that was the prevalent worldview. Basically, that there was a God, there was an absolute, and there was a standard that we should follow. Okay, you go ahead probably about 1,000 years or so, and all of a sudden you get all this skepticism rising, and it was attacking many things. You had the Copernican revolution, we had the Galileo trial, you had all these things happening, and science was becoming the answer. The idea of theology and a God, you know, that was not the answer anymore. You had skeptics there, you had, you know, all these things going on. Descartes, which was a Christian, a Catholic Christian, he wanted basically to get back to, if you want to call it, a fundamental belief system that was correct, that you could base all your beliefs on. And his view was basically it was God, because he was a Christian. So he basically tried to doubt everything until you could come back to one fundamental thing that you could build all your worldview on. And that's where his famous saying is, you know, I think, therefore I am. And basically, he says it's an indubitable truth. This truth, because I think I am, you can build everything on. Now, he basically was doing this to basically save theology from all the skepticism. And he believed, and he went on in his meditations and wrote several meditations basically proving God and that you can't shift away from it. And what you're doing is basically God is in control. He is the authority. He is the absolute truth, goodness, and beauty. But he opened the door. Unintended things happened that he had no idea were going to happen from what he said. By changing the objective truth from God, which is outside, to what I think, opened a whole slew of things. But a little bit later, about 150 years later, Rousseau, he came along, and he basically was thinking about all these things. And he basically recounts one time when he was a kid in his confessions. By the way, confessions, this doesn't mean something you did wrong. It's basically like confessing what you did in your life. But when he stole some asparagus when he was a young kid, now he didn't steal it because he thought it was great, it was wonderful. Augustine stole it because, you know, he had plenty of pears, but he just desired that. You know, Rousseau basically said he was stole from his master, talked him into stealing it. He was basically doing it to please somebody else, not himself. He was doing it under coercion. He was being coerced. Basically, society was causing the problems. And because he was based it on what his views were versus society and stuff, basically he said, you know, it was basically man is born free and everywhere in chains. It's basically the conscious is the rule now, not something outside, but basically by shifting where you base your fundamental beliefs from outside on God to what your conscience or what you think is what you feel. it basically shifted it. So that Cartesian pivot point changed all this stuff. If you want to call it the thinking, self-certainty becomes Rousseau's moral authenticity, what he really thought was being authentic. So basically you have Rousseau taking what Descartes did and shifted it, and it opens the door for many things going on like that. And that's for the problem with the Cocteau's double legacy. You know, Descartes was trying to basically defend God, defend the Catholic Church and religions, but the problem was it became all about what you believe, the homo mensura. Sincerity replaces truth, indignation replaces justice. So basically, Augustine was theocentric cosmos. Descartes shifted it to self-centered, but he was still a Christian. But Rousseau basically ripped it all away and basically said that we're self-autonomous, and we could go from there. So Augustine's warning, and he basically said, Augustine even echoed this early on. He said, if you believe what you like, it's not the gospel you believe, but yourself. The contemporary the cautions as you have is nowadays people believe in whatever they want to. And we need to be very careful when we write something and we take it, that it cannot be misinterpreted. And also, I really believe that basically misinterpreting someone's comments or their ideas or their papers or positions and taking it out of context to use it for your own good is basically, in my opinion, is a terrible thing. And basically what happened is all the people after Descartes took what he was doing in the context was trying to basically get back to an absolute God, took it out, ripped it out, made it way for their own thing. So when you basically moral judgment is eroded, then basically now it becomes a self, the rise of modern self, all these things like that. So basically you do away with Augustine's humility there. We need to be very careful too, because AI runs these same risks too. You know, we like to think AI is all the answers, but there's always unintended consequences, and that can be very, very bad. So we need to put guardrails on AI to try to make sure we don't have these unintended consequences that roll on down the road, things that are basically terrible for us. So what we do is we find out that Augustine steals a pear and finds hell. Rousseau steals asparagus and finds injustice because the society said you couldn't do it. Between them, Descartes thinks, and he dismantles all that. Basically, the old saying, the road to hell is paved not with just good intentions, but with the foundational truths, human or machine, that can outrun their authors. And we need to make sure that we don't outrun our authors. Thank you very much.